Hey guys, welcome to episode number 527. Today is Monday, so it's Update Monday, and I have had a frustrating and tiring 3 days. Now, if you hadn't watched the weather, hadn't seen the news, New England recently got hit by another one of those bomb cyclones. It's basically a hurricane that stands still and it continuously hits the same place over and over and over again. And this time, on Friday, it decided to park itself off the coast of Massachusetts, and my town was in the path of this bomb cyclone, and we received basically hurricane force winds for almost a 24-hour period. And even though we have municipal electric, which usually means that the lights stay on, we lost power. We lost power big time. We lost power for all day Friday, all day Saturday, and all day Sunday. And the power just came back on late Sunday night. Now, that would suck if you just were living in a town. It sucks even more when you have a fish room down below you. And I wanted to sort of walk through the fish room. Now that the power is back on, I want to tell the story of exactly what happened, what I did, and what I learned about the experience. Because as I've said, this is the first time I've lost power in the 5 years I've lived here. And it really was a worthwhile learning experience, and hopefully you guys can learn a few lessons along with me. So let's go take a look at the fish room and we can see exactly what happened. Alright, so as you can see, the power is back on, everything is back to normal, and I wanted to start with the casualties because that's always at the top of mind, what didn't make it. And in this case, with 3 days without power, the only casualty that I had of note is a clown loach. And this guy was pretty old. He was a rescue from, I think, around 3 or 4 years ago. And you guys have probably never actually seen this fish in any of my videos because he loves to hide in this 300-gallon stock tank. It's a shame that he didn't make it. I'm gonna pull him out of here, but I am amazed. I'm shocked that that was the only considerable loss that I've had from this event. But I want to walk through exactly what happened and what I learned from this experience. So I was fortunate enough to be home when the power went out. And I was home all day working on my aquarium box stuff, and I heard the winds picking up outside. It was just tearing past the house, and I saw sticks and branches coming off the trees, and all of a sudden I heard a tree crack and break outside. And we actually, just in my backyard alone, lost 3 full-grown pine trees. These things are like 60 or 70 feet tall. Full-grown pine trees, fully matured, nothing wrong with them. They weren't dead, they were alive. The winds were just so strong, they just grabbed them and yanked them out of the ground. And that is basically what happened all around town, all at the same time. All these giant trees came down all at the same time, and power went out, as you'd expect. On my road alone, I think we had 3 trees that were down across the lines. The lines were broken in several places, and the road was completely impassable for 3 days, which is absolutely crazy. But I was home when the power eventually did go out, and so the first thing I did was, of course, I came down to the fish room. This being the first time that the power has gone out in the 5 years that this fish room has been up, I wanted to see exactly what was going to happen in the event of the power outage, and I'm glad that I did. And this is the biggest thing that I noticed. The first thing I did was I needed to make sure that my drip system had shut off. Now I've got a little Arduino board here with a backup battery and a mechanical motorized switch here, which is supposed to, in the event of a power outage, have enough juice in this battery to flip this switch to shut off the drip system. If that doesn't happen, what would occur is I would continuously get this drip of water into my system while the power is out. So the first thing I did was I made sure that that system operated as it was supposed to and shut this drip line off. And of course it did not do that. I think it's been a year or two since I've tested that battery, and it's on a trickle charge and it's a rechargeable battery, but I believe that battery is completely dead. So that failed. That was supposed to be one of my precautionary measures here to make sure something like this would not happen. But I was here, I was lucky enough to be here. If I was not here, this would have continued to drip at a rate of, I think it's 40 gallons per day onto the floor. So glad that I was here to catch that. What I did was I just manually went and shut off these valves so that the trickle of new water into this system would stop. All right, the next big thing is the pumps stopped. The pump in this barrel stopped, which means all of the water from these 40-gallon aquariums was overflowing. And with any drilled aquarium, you have sort of a line, a level line for your water. But when the water flow stops, what happens is the water drops in the tank, usually about a ½ inch or so. But you have to multiply that by 8 aquariums in this rack, and that's the amount of water, extra water, that flowed down the overflows into my central sump system. And here's where I got in trouble. I designed this system originally just for these 8 aquariums, and what ended up happening was the amount of water that overflowed out of these tanks was fine. It's what I designed these barrels for, and it was able to basically take on that extra water, which ended up being, I think, about 15 gallons or so. And so this barrel was full, this barrel was full, and the extra 15 gallons basically acted as overflow water and came over here into the wastewater barrel, which has the sump pump, which obviously doesn't work when the power is out, but it's a place for that water to accumulate. That 15 gallons of water, even if it was 20-25 gallons of water, it'd be perfectly fine. There's plenty of space in here for that those extra gallons. If the pump kicks back on, if power comes back on, this barrel may get pretty low in terms of its water volume, but hopefully I would have the drip on so it would top itself back off. What I didn't anticipate, and a mistake that I made, was when I retrofitted the turtle system to have an overflow, I took the 2-inch pipe here and I connected it to the same pipe system, the same overflow system. So essentially what we had was a 3-barrel sump system that was designed for these aquariums, which was later retrofitted to work with the 300-gallon stock tank and the filter barrels that I have over here. And the extra water volume that this 300-gallon stock tank adds more than doubled the amount of water, the overflow water, that surged into my wastewater barrel as a result of the power kicking off. The pump in here kicks off, which means this barrel is full. It means this tank loses water. I think it lost like almost an inch of water. This is the overflow here. All that water dumped into here. All that extra water went out the 2-inch overflow there, and it all ended up in my wastewater barrel over here. So what that caused was more water than this system was intended for backing up in this barrel, which eventually pushed its way into this barrel, which was about to push its way into this barrel
but I stopped it. Thank God I was here. What I had to do was basically take 5-gallon buckets and siphon about 20-25 gallons of water out of this wastewater barrel because it was just too much. What would have happened is all of this media would have either ended up in this barrel or it would have ended up in this barrel. It would have been a complete mess to try to clean up afterwards, but I'm sort of overcommitted here for how much water can overflow into this barrel without power on. So that's an issue I'm going to need to address, and I think it's a really important lesson for anyone that is designing their own DIY aquarium systems. Whenever you set something up in the first place, there's reasons why you set it up that way. And the most dangerous part is when you start to retrofit or change things later on down the line. You may sort of skirt around some of the original considerations that you had made, or completely forgot why some of the decisions were made in the first place. And you may not anticipate something like this happening. I don't think water would have ended up on the floor. It may have. It probably wouldn't have been a lot of water, maybe 5 or 10 gallons, but in any case, it would have disturbed this system and it would have been a mess to clean up. So I'm glad that I caught this drip issue with the battery. I'm glad that I caught the issue with the shared wastewater pipe from the two aquarium systems. And all in all, I was able to avoid disaster and sort of stabilize this basement pretty quickly thereafter. Now, one lucky thing that I had going for me in terms of the species that I'm keeping, currently I've got goldfish, which are cold tolerant. I've got crayfish, and more crayfish, which are cold tolerant. I've got baby axolotls, which are cold tolerant. I've got adult axolotls, which are cold tolerant. I've got turtles, which are able to slow down and sort of brumate when it gets colder. I wouldn't necessarily call them cold tolerant, but they were fine. They're reptiles. I've got koi in here as well, cold tolerant. The only fish that were in these systems that were tropical in nature, we've got the clown loach that didn't make it. We've got some Endler's live bears. They mostly seem to be okay. And they are also in these tanks as well. We've got some mollies in here and some cory cats and whatnot. All of the tropical fish basically made it except for that clown loach, which is kind of surprising. It's one of those things where there's a lot of advice for how to save an aquarium in the event of a power outage. If you have one aquarium, there are, several steps you can take to save it in the event of a power outage. You can get a battery operated bubbler, so you're adding air to it. You can wrap it in a blanket or thermal blanket or something like that. You can keep the lid on to keep the heat in. There's a list of things you can do in order to keep one aquarium pretty well situated for the long haul. The thing that changes is when you have an entire room full of aquariums, it becomes a lot more difficult to care for all of those things individually. There's no way that when you get to a certain size or a certain number of tanks that you can put a battery operated air stone on each tank, because basically what you're doing is multiplying the needs by the number of tanks you have, and that becomes something that is really difficult to plan for and really expensive in the off chance that you're going to need it. So what most people do is they get a generator, especially if you've got a lot of heat sensitive fish. Getting a generator to run an entire fish room is by far the best solution. I unfortunately did not have a generator. It's on my list of accessories to buy, but they are fairly expensive. They're not operated very often, and the expense versus the number of times that I plan on using it, the ratio just wasn't quite high enough to put it at the top of my list. So it is on the list. It's actually getting higher on the list after this weekend, but that also was not in the cards this time. One thing that I did have going for me, besides mostly having the cold tolerant species down here, is the surface area. Because I'm using a 300-gallon stock tank, there's a lot of surface area here for gas exchange. The same is true for the 40-gallon breeders, and they're lightly stocked as well, which means the fish in them are not going to really be oxygen deprived in a scenario like this. The main problem is just the lack of heat. That's the biggie. And the longer a power outage goes on, the colder these tanks get, and the more problems will start to crop up. So in that respect, you know, a 3-day outage in my case was about the limit. I think if it had gone on for a 4th day, I probably would have lost all of the mollies, probably would have lost all of the endlers. The turtles may have started to exhibit some signs. I need to keep an eye on them because they can develop respiratory problems. They may get listless. They may be clinging on to, you know, decor or staying on the land instead of like sleeping and hanging out underwater. That can definitely happen to turtles if they're kept in cold water or if they get shocked like that. So I'm definitely going to need to keep an eye on them. I will need to keep an eye on all of the fish in these systems as well, because diseases can basically outbreak as a result of stress, as a result of swings in temperature and pH and ammonia and everything else that happens in these tanks when it goes through an event like this. And you know, it takes an event like this to really appreciate how much electricity and how dependent on electricity aquariums are and fish rooms are. Everything you see here is powered by electricity, and without it, this boat is dead in the water. And I'm grateful that it didn't go that 4th day and that I didn't lose a lot of things. I was contemplating very strongly renting a generator, borrowing a generator, finding some way to get all of these tanks set up and running. But by the time I had my mind on that, the work crew was already fixing the wires. So I just stuck it out for the extra half day, and everything made it. Important thing to note, while this was going on, all of these tanks were completely in the dark. It was completely silent down here, which is very eerie, especially with all of the sounds that usually accompany a fish room. This basement being dead silent is something I've never experienced. And, you know, the fish, for the most part, did fine. You know, they slowed down, they slept. They slept for 3 days. I did not feed them at all over the course of the 3 days, with the thinking being that the more food I toss in, the more ammonia is going to be generated. These tanks are not individually cycled. It's a central sump system, so without that, I don't have a good cycle in each tank. So I needed to limit the waste in each of these tanks. And you can see the bottoms of these tanks are filthy. And this is, I would say, about half of algae that was attached to the glass and just completely died off over the course of the 3 days. I would say that's probably the best thing that happened. All the algae just sort of died off because it just didn't have any light for 3 days. The other half is just detritus and mulm that I was planning to vacuum out of these tanks the next day. I usually do my water changes and cleaning the aquariums. Even though I have the drip system, I still vacuum the bottoms of these tanks to keep them clean. I usually do that once or twice a week. It was a Friday. I was planning on doing it on Saturday, and obviously we lost power. So these tanks already had quite a bit of detritus in them. It is amplified in these tanks, obviously, because they're bare bottom, so you can see everything. But it's something that I do like to keep on top of. And so I knew that feeding these tanks while the power was out would just increase the problems that these tanks were experiencing. So now that the power is back on, these fish are all extremely hungry. I'm trying to sort of power feed them a little bit to get them back up into fighting shape, to make sure that they don't succumb to some of the stresses that are involved in a power outage, a prolonged power outage like this. But for the most part, they're hanging in there. They're doing well, which is really important. Which is really important to me. I mean, I would have been devastated if I had lost everything. But again, I don't. But beyond getting a generator, I don't know if there's a whole lot that I could have done to prevent it in this case. So we've learned a lot of lessons down here, and we've got a few modifications that we need to make to these aquariums and these systems to make sure that if this happens again, we're a little bit more prepared. If this happens again, nothing is going to go wrong, and we have a plan of action to make sure that we give these guys the best shot we can for them to survive. Because they are 100% dependent on us as aquarium keepers, and we are 100% dependent on electricity in order for these systems to work. So that's sort of the lesson learned. I am sad that this is the result. We did lose one clown loach. I hope you can agree that it could have been a heck of a lot worse, but you know, I think there's a lot of factors that went into you know, the outcome here. So that's my story. That's what's been going on with me for the past 3 days. I'm glad that the power is back on. I'm glad that we can go back to our normal routine down here in the fish room, and I'm glad we can move on and learn from this experience. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys later.